They thought it was a joke, tying a black woman to a tree, laughing as if her pain was nothing more than entertainment. But what they didn't know was that the woman they mocked held more power than they could ever imagine. This wasn't just cruelty, it was the beginning of their downfall. Because behind those chains and humiliation stood a leader whose voice could shake entire systems. What happened next would silence their laughter forever. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning in the small town, a quiet place where nothing ever seemed to change. The sun stretched across the courthouse steps, where crowds gathered for their daily routines. Among them was a woman who carried herself with quiet strength, her presence calm but commanding. To most, she looked like just another passer-by, but those who knew her understood she was more than that. A voice for the voiceless, a fighter for justice, someone who had built her life on lifting others up. Yet to the officers patrolling that day, none of that mattered. All they saw was the color of her skin, and in their arrogance, they mistook dignity for weakness. They didn't see the years of sacrifice, the communities she had defended, or the battles she had already won in courtrooms and public squares. To them, she was simply a target, someone to mock, to dehumanize, to use as a stage for their cruelty. As the morning crowd passed by, whispers spread. Some watched in silence, afraid to intervene. Others turned away, unwilling to get involved. But no one realized that what was unfolding would soon shake the entire town. For in that moment, while the woman stood at the center of humiliation, a storm was quietly building. A storm that would expose truths these officers thought would never come to light. The laughter echoed down the street, sharp and cruel, as the officers tightened the ropes around her wrists. They treated it like a game, sneering as if they had complete control, as if no one would ever dare challenge them. One officer leaned against his squad car, smirking at the crowd that had gathered. "This is what happens," his eyes seemed to say, "when you forget your place." But beneath their arrogance, something was shifting. The woman stood tall, even as the bark dug into her back and the coarse rope burned her skin. She did not cry out, did not beg for release. Her silence was not weakness, it was defiance. Every second she endured without breaking unsettled those watching. Some in the crowd began recording with shaky hands, their eyes wide with disbelief. Others whispered, recognizing her face. She wasn't just any woman. She was the very same leader who had stood in front of City Hall just weeks earlier, calling out corruption and demanding reform. She had shaken the foundations of power before, and she was feared because of it. That fear had brought her here, bound and humiliated, under the false belief that silencing her would end her fight. The officers didn't realize the danger wasn't in her resistance. It was in the witnesses. Videos spread like wildfire, messages shooting across phones and screens. Within minutes, her image, the ropes, the tree, the cruel laughter, was everywhere. What the officers had meant as humiliation became a mirror reflecting the ugly truth they tried to hide. And still, she stood. The tension rose with every second, the crowd growing restless. Some shuffled forward, guilt pressing against their silence. Others turned their cameras closer, capturing every cruel smile, every unjust action. The officers laughed louder, as if to drown out the unease creeping around them. But deep down, they must have felt it too. The unraveling, the shift of power slipping through their hands. The woman's calm eyes scanned the crowd. She knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Not police backup, but something else. A sound that promised change. What the officers thought was control was quickly becoming exposure, and they were standing at the edge of a storm that would soon destroy everything they thought untouchable. The sirens grew louder, slicing through the mocking laughter of the officers. Their smirks faltered for the first time as flashing lights appeared at the end of the street. But this wasn't the kind of arrival they had expected. It wasn't fellow officers rushing to back them up. It was a convoy of black SUVs, sleek and commanding, pulling to a stop with an authority that silenced the entire crowd. From the lead vehicle stepped figures dressed in suits, not uniforms. Their presence alone sent a ripple through the onlookers. Cameras turned instantly. And then the whispers started. Names, titles, recognition. These weren't ordinary bystanders. They were officials, advisors, and members of the Justice Department itself. At the center of them, walking with calm precision, was a man who carried the weight of the nation in his stride. His eyes locked on the woman tied to the tree, and in that instant, everything changed. The ropes were quickly cut, her wrists freed. The laughter of moments ago was gone, replaced by stunned silence. The officers who had mocked her now shifted uncomfortably, their bravado crumbling. For in that moment, the truth was undeniable. The woman they had humiliated wasn't just a random target. She was the very leader whose influence reached the highest offices of power. She had allies in places they could never touch, connections that could end careers with a single call. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, others in gasps of shock. Phones shook in trembling hands as every second was captured and broadcasted live. The woman, though bruised and weary, stood taller than ever. Her silence turned into strength, her gaze cutting sharper than any words. The officers had not just attacked a woman, they had attacked justice itself. And now, with the world watching, they realized their laughter had become their own downfall. As the ropes fell to the ground, the woman stepped forward, not as a victim, but as a symbol of unshakable power. The crowd that once stood frozen in silence now erupted in applause, their voices rising in unison. What was meant to be an act of humiliation had transformed into a moment of awakening. The officers who once laughed now hung their heads, realizing too late the gravity of their actions. News outlets swarmed the scene within hours. Every major channel replayed the footage, the cruel laughter, the ropes, the moment of exposure. The world watched with outrage, and the story ignited conversations across every corner of the country. No longer was this just about one woman bound to a tree. It became a mirror reflecting centuries of injustice, abuse, and arrogance hidden under authority. The officers were suspended, their names dragged into headlines. Investigations followed, careers ended, and reputations crumbled. What they thought was power had dissolved in an instant, leaving behind only shame. But for the woman, this was not revenge. It was vindication. She used the moment not to settle scores, but to amplify her cause. Standing before the cameras, she spoke not of her suffering, but of the need for change. Her words carried the weight of every injustice endured by those who never had the chance to speak. And in that moment, millions listened. Her story became more than an incident. It became a call to action. A reminder that silence is complicity, that laughter at cruelty can quickly turn to regret, and that real power lies not in oppression, but in truth. And so, the question echoed beyond that small town, reaching every heart that heard her story. How many more humiliations must be endured before justice is no longer a fight, but a promise kept?